Welcome to Lecture 12, Eastern European Folk Music. So when we think of Eastern Europe, we think of those regions that are east of Germany, Austria, and Italy. And they're characterized by religion and a different kind of language, or I should say languages, that are different than the Latin-oriented languages and the Celtic-oriented languages. So mostly we're talking about the Slavic languages and the Uralic languages, which is mostly Hungary, and then the Eastern Orthodox Church. And it's played a prominent role in the history and culture of Eastern and Southeastern Europe since the time of Constantine. And both of those religions, the Roman Catholic religion and the Eastern Orthodox Church, pretty much started about the same time and have similar traditions. One of the main differences is the Eastern Orthodox Church doesn't have papal infallibility. And so it kind of resembles Protestantism in a way, but retains almost every other Catholic ritual. And you'll notice that there's a different alphabet that's used, called a Cyrillic alphabet. And this little circle on the left side where my cursor is shows you the letters that are common between the Latin alphabet and then the Cyrillic or Greek-oriented alphabet. So this part of the world is similar to what we've studied, but very different in terms of its language and religious orientation. There's a geographic division between Western and Eastern Europe, and usually it's thought of as several mountain ranges. So in this large map of Europe, you'll see where my cursor is, there's a huge area called the Ural Mountains. And then down by the Black Sea down here near the Mediterranean Sea and in the Caspian Sea, we have the Caucasus Mountains and the Carpathian Mountains. They all represent geographical barriers from west to east. And we can see through the migration and the settlement over centuries how important those geographical divisions were. So let's look at the folk music origins and the ancient culturally rich traditions of the Turks, the Slavs, which were the predominant large group of people that centered in the middle of that Eastern European area, now known as the Russians and the Ukrainians, etc. The Magyars, who are now the Hungarians. The Romani, which originally come from North India, and we consider them now to be called gypsies, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. And then, of course, the Jewish influence, which happens all throughout that part of Europe. So let's look at the Romani, sometimes called gypsies. That's actually kind of a pejorative term, a judgmental term, but it was actually a term coined in ignorance. Back in the 16th century, the people in Europe thought that they were from Egypt, and they're wandering tribes that have wandered throughout Europe for centuries, and they thought they came from Egypt. So the term was Gypkion, and that's where we get the term gypsy. But they're actually called the Romani, and the Rome, R-O-M, means man. But these are the people who not only have a tradition that goes back to northern India, but have a Middle Eastern tradition, a strong European tradition, and we're going to hear some wonderful virtuosic music played by the Romani. Then we have the Serbians, and the Serbians down near Greece have a strong Turkish and Greek influence, as you would imagine. And you can see the instruments that are in this carving, or in this engraving, I should say. And we can recognize those as having some Greek origins. And during their Ottoman enslavement by the Ottoman Turks, their folk and faith music went underground. They weren't allowed to own property, they weren't allowed to read and write, and they were also denied the use of musical instruments. In fact, one of the penalties for playing a musical instrument was to be blinded, if you can imagine that. Well, now there is a famous style of music called Balkan brass. And this kind of came out of, after some of the civil wars and other wars that they had, military musicians got together and created their own groups. Now this is just absolutely famous, and believe it or not, the Balkan brass are played in discos. So there's a wonderful video for you to get this sense of modern Serbian music with a long-standing tradition. Then we're going to look at Bosnia. And the Sevda or Sevdalinka is a folk song which traces its origins back once again to Ottoman times, Turkish times, Islamic times. But the songs are now found throughout the former, what used to be called Yugoslavia, which is now Bosnia. And they have been handed down over 5 centuries and are still part of the culture of the area. Now, they've had many, many civil wars, and the area has been fought over for centuries. And so this is the Bosnian form of what we would call in America the blues, played to get rid of the blues feelings, the feelings of depression. Well, this is a very similar style of music in Bosnia. Absolutely beautiful. And it's a lamentation, singing about sorrow and loss. But it actually is so uplifting when one hears it now that it's very, very popular even today. Then we'll look at Slovenia. And to outsiders, the Slovenian folk music means some form of polka. Though they had all sorts of different styles of music in Slovenia, it's still the most popular form of music in Slovenia today. And it has strong Greco-Roman influences in terms of the folk music in that area, but you're going to hear in Slovenian a wonderful polka. And then the Jewish influence throughout this part of the world is profound and goes back at least 2,000 or more years. And it's called klezmer music. Now, klezmer is an instrumental musical style of the Ashkenazi Jews of Central and Eastern Europe. Now, you'll notice on this picture, there's a man playing a clarinet, and they have a tuba, a violin, a bass, and a drum. Well, these are dance tunes, ritual melodies, and incredible improvisation, making up things on the fly that are played for listening and played for weddings and other social functions. And the clarinet player is the leader of the group musically and plays in almost a singing style. And it's a wonderful sound that has influenced modern American jazz through such greats as Benny Goodman, who was a wonderful clarinet player from the 1930s and 40s. And so klezmer music is extremely popular still in Central Europe. And the Jewish influence is just fantastic. And then we'll look at Bulgaria. And singing has always been one of the biggest parts of the Bulgarian culture. And songs were often sung by women at work parties, such as the Sedenka, which is often attended by young men and women in search of partners. It's kind of a courtship thing. It was singing for betrothal ceremonies and, of course, just for fun. But women had an extensive repertoire of songs. They sang while working in the fields. While that has been modernized with still the main roots of that sound into just an absolutely phenomenal art form today of singing. So I think you really enjoy that. The galdulka is a bowled instrument, and it comes from the root meaning to make noise, hum, or buzz, and it's because of the bowing that you can see with that particular instrument. And you can see the African, Greek, Roman influence of that instrument and the Middle Eastern influence. Then we have the Ukraine, and the hopak is a Cossack dance. It's a Ukrainian folk dance with technically amazing acrobatic feats. It was copied by the Russians as well. And you've heard about the Russians being able to dance really almost with their butts to the ground, as you can see in this one picture. And it's highly athletic dancing. And originally, it was improvised and reflected the male's sense of manliness and heroism, speed and strength. But it's danced by both men and women now. And the hopak in Ukrainian means the hopping dance. I think you'll really enjoy that. And finally, we have Russia. Now, we're not going into all of the balletic traditions, and once again, we're not looking at the classical music of all of these countries, which is for another course and is legion. There's just fabulous music of that style. And then today's pop music, which is influenced by the West. But in Russia, the balalaika is a Russian stringed instrument of the lute family. And look at the triangular shape. The man in the upper right-hand corner of this slide is playing a contrabass balalaika. And then we have smaller ones. They're a family of instruments. And they are probably a variation of what was known as the domra, the lute again. And then you can see that going back to the gourd shapes. And this is just another theme and variation of the instruments we've seen before. But what's wonderful about the balalaika is they created orchestras out of them. So the video you get to watch is of a balalaika orchestra from Russia. Your assignment is going to seem really familiar. Check Canvas for the videos to watch and the Google Doc quiz. And I'll see you in class. Thank you.